Women on a Green Mission. Follow along as two friends document their unfurling permaculture journeys.
Join our chats each week where we'll be sharing how we and others apply permaculture to our gardens and daily life.
We're no experts. We're at the start of our journey, fumbling our way to a greener life. We love your company along the way. Hey, Lise.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Back for another week.
I know. And it's been a busy week too. Well, been a busy weekend.
Yes, it has been.
What have you been up to?
It was just Easter for anybody who is listening in. So we recorded this just after Easter, and yes, we did a big backyard blitz. So we had Oscar's family over, his auntie and uncle for the long weekend, and then Sunday we just smashed out some jobs. So we did about 300 meters of garden beds of mulch and seaweed.
That's huge.
So we went to the beach. Yeah, it was massive. Went to the beach, collected seaweed, used the mulch from the trees that got chipped down the back. And then we planted our first tree. So Oscar's uncle and auntie bought us a tree, a mulberry tree. So we planted that. And what else did we do? Oscar built some garden beds. We cut up all the corrugated iron that we got from Marketplace, and he's got one bed together and everything's cut up for the next bed. So yeah, we just did a heaps of garden work pretty much. It would have been nice to get 2 days of gardening in, but it was Easter and everyone was here. So yeah, we just made the most of family time.
You've got to have some downtime too and have that fun and connect and catch up with everyone. So that's so good. So how thick is the mulch that you've put down?
Yeah, so I started doing it the first time with seaweed and then hay and mulch and that kind of way of doing it. But when we had to move one of the piles because it wasn't in line with the fence, I got overexcited and did it before the fence. And so now they were wrong, and the pipe work for the plumbing has to go there. So I moved one side over to the other side of the block. And it was funny because in between the layer of clay and then, which is like our topsoil is just clay, and the seaweed, it went really slimy and it didn't really soak into anything because of the clay topsoil. So what I've done this time is put quite a thick layer of mulch down, like the chipped thick mulch, and then put the seaweed on top of that. So at least when the seaweed gets wet again and starts breaking down, it's got something to kind of absorb.
You've sort of got that.
So it's quite a thick layer.
Carbonaceous type nappy, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It just soaks it all up. So we've got quite a thick layer of topsoil, like a couple of centimeters at least, and then the seaweed. But then on top of that now, there's like a really fine layer of mulch because the guys that did the trees did stump grinding, and the stump grindings are really fine, almost powdery kind of chip. It's not the thick bark chips.
Yeah.
And that's been sitting there for 3 weeks now. So the top's really chippy, but underneath it's all kind of mixed with the soil already and broken down really, really quickly because it's so fine. So I've actually dug about, 20 or so centimeters in with a fork and mix that all through, and that's now my next layer. So it's kind of getting closer to being more like soil. But I'm really struggling to get a hold of chicken manure still, or cow manure, or anything.
Oh, really?
Like nobody seems to have it. Yeah, there's a lot of horses, but I'm kind of hesitant because I don't know what they've been vaccinated and what they've kind of had and blah blah blah. But I could put that in my hot compost. I'm not really keen to put that in my beds, but yeah, I'm really struggling to find chicken manure. Or cow manure either. I've even gone and called all the landscaping places to see if they could do a bulk load, and they don't even sell it.
So what about, you haven't got chicken farmers up there, or any farmers that run cattle that'd be happy for you to come and clean up some yards? Or
I'm gonna have to do some more investigating, but it's all sugarcane around here. And then there was a dairy, and it closed down a few years ago. That's where everybody was getting their cow manure from. But yeah, we don't.
I don't want to be milking chickens.
No, don't milk chickens. That's not a good idea. So yeah, I don't know. I've got to keep looking and knocking on some doors, and I've put it on a Facebook group. So I've put it on our local gardening group. I've kind of reached out to a few people around, went to the local nursery, asked her. I've just been asking everybody, and they're like, yeah, I don't know, like, you just have to find a farm somewhere and find a farmer. And I'm like, I'm going to cold call farmers to ask for poo. Like,
Yeah. Can I come
I
and
don't
pick up
know.
some of your poo?
Yeah, I'm kind of at my wits' end trying to find some poop. So there
Yeah, it's
is randomly a rabbit rescue farm. Don't know why they're rescuing rabbits. I don't exactly. I need to do my research. But she's offered me rabbit hutch poo, so it's mixed in with straw and stuff.
oh,
And
awesome.
apparently that's okay for the garden. So
Yeah.
that'll
Yeah,
be my
rabbit
next point of
poo's
call. Like,
it's quite a cool manure. So with manures, you've got your hot manure and your cool manure. So ones that, like
yeah,
chicken manure, you don't want to be putting that directly onto your plants because it burns.
yeah,
But things like rabbit manure, yeah, it's quite cool.
mm,
So you can basically just put it in the garden and yeah, it doesn't have to break down a lot before it's ready to be
yeah.
incorporated and you can grow in it. So yeah.
Mm. So yeah, I might take them up on that. But yeah, I was also going to reach out to our alumni group for our permaculture PDC because I've got a lot of seaweed in there. Like, I know to have the manure is good, but is seaweed good enough until I can kind of find some manure? Like, I don't know whether to kind of hold off and stop layering until I can get my hands on some manure, or yeah, whether seaweed's a good alternative, or yeah. So
Yeah, maybe
gotta
put
do
it
some
out to
research on that.
put it out to the alumni and see what they say.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
And what about you? What have you been up to?
Oh, we had a busy, busy Easter.
Mm, I
So
saw some
we,
photos on our group.
yeah, it was really good actually to get done what we got done, even though we'd planned to do the duck run. So the ducks have got like their house and they've got an automatic door, which is, day, night, automatic open and close. But the problem is ducks don't roost, so they don't sort of follow what the sun does. So they don't go inside before dark. So often they'll be left outside. So what we wanted to do is actually build a fully predator fox proof run so that that door can permanently
Mm,
stay open. They can be inside, they can be outside, and it doesn't matter. And also when we go away, like if we've got someone here looking after the place,
yeah,
I don't want them to have to feel like they need to go chasing ducks around and go and put them to bed like we do. We sort of gather them up and herd them. Oh,
yeah,
bed, off you go. So we thought, well, this
yeah,
way they can still have a really nice sized, decent outdoor area. It's daytime, nighttime, and it just doesn't matter. And then we can still open the door when we're here for the day, and they can still head out to the orchard. So, so the plan was to get that done. However,
mm-hmm.
because we are so brilliant at project management, we looked at it and went, oh crap, we've got branches to trim because they're hanging too low. So then we've got to trim them. Like, okay, now we've got to chip them because otherwise the branches are just going to sit there for the next 6 months because we're not going to get back to it. So drag the little chipper out and we've got like just this little, it's like a little one. Like it only takes like a 40 mil branch. It's not big, but
Yeah,
it was enough. So yeah, that was 4 hours of on and off trimming and then
yeah,
chipping. Then we had to move the worm bath. So you've seen our worm bath that's up on
yeah.
pickets. So we had to dismantle all that and move it like 4 meters in one direction. And then when we were there and we are like, well, it hasn't had a lid for ages, a proper lid, because the original lid broke because it was too heavy. And I've just
Mm.
been using a screen door over the top of it. That stops the rodents from getting in. And I'm like, you know what? Let's make a lid. So then we decided to make a lid, and then we decided to make some tables out of some leftover things that we had so that we had a proper seed planting and propagation area, which ours is, last time you were here, you saw it was really ad hoc. We had some under the pergola, we had some up the other end of the yard, some over near the chickens. So that's all in one area now, and it's all protected from the ducks so they can't go and
What?
eat anything. And it's
Yeah,
so good to have that done. It felt so good. So even though the run isn't done yet, that's okay. That'll be next weekend, weekend after, whatever. To have that done
yeah,
felt great. Plus, I got into the garden, so I got garlic in. I wasn't going to do garlic this year.
yeah,
Last season
yeah.
was a bit dismal for me. And this year I sort of went, oh, look, again, we're still in that process of moving beds. So do I, don't I? And then I went, oh, you know what, screw it, I'm going to. But then I'm like, well, it's a bit late now to order something online. So actual proper, to grow in-ground garlic. So I was at the supermarket and went, oh, they've got Australian garlic. Oh, look at that. One sprouted. Thanks very much. So I just bought 3 bulbs, broke them up and it was about 45 decent sized cloves to plant up. So whacked those in.
Oh, good.
Yeah, got a heap of
Yeah.
seeds in, got the snow peas in, chased chickens. They
Did you
got
do
into
anything?
the annual beds. Oh my God. Stress.
Oh, no.
I was like, oh my God, like all my little baby beetroots are coming up. The onions are starting to put their heads up. Some of the peas had started to come up. I couldn't think of the word then. I could see them. They started to come up, and I'm thinking, oh, they're going to be all annihilated. But where they scratched was where we'd had potatoes growing, and when we'd harvested them, we'd missed them. And some of them have resprouted as they do, and we're just like, oh, whatever, you can stay there for, over winter, and then we'll harvest you, on the other side. But for whatever reason, they dug a few of those up, so we were pretty lucky.
Random.
Yeah.
Did you do anything to prep for your garlic beds?
Yes. So I topped the original bed up with a bit of compost, but also where we had moved the worm bath to was originally where the duck pond was. And of course, the duck pond gets we've only got one of those little blue shell ponds, like the kiddie pools. And so that gets poured out and then topped up every 3 to 4 days, depending on how mucky it gets. So you can imagine that under there, with all the wood chip and everything that was under there, it just got super soaked, and the earthworms absolutely loved it. So we scraped a lot of that back, and I used that to top it as well. So it had compost, and then essentially in situ compost from wood chip. And that was pretty much it. Yeah.
Cool.
So we'll see how it goes. Bit of an experiment.
Very
And just,
exciting.
I just think sometimes, we get a little bit hung up on, it's got, you've got to buy it from someone who's, sells like seed potatoes. You always have to buy seed potatoes. Well, it's a good idea too, because you know that you're getting a good quality product. You know you're getting it disease free. However, for the backyard gardener, as long as you're not going to be planting the same thing in the same area every single time, most of the time, if your seeds are sprouting in the drawer, throw them in the garden. Who cares? It's the chances
the
of
farmers market.
Yeah.
Going to the farmers markets and getting good quality garlic or potatoes or sweet potato or whatever it is to pop in the ground. They're growing it from probably a really good seed. So just use that.
Exactly. And if you, make sure that you are either using fumigants or you're doing something to combat breaking the cycle so that you don't have, those issues from planting over and over and over again the same things, then, the chances of you introducing something into your garden are pretty low for the average backyard gardener. Market gardeners or whatever, different story. But I just think, if you've got something that you think, oh, maybe should I grow it? Should I not? Yes, grow it. Give it a go. So, it was a busy weekend.
And so who have we got this week that we're chatting to?
So this week we've got the gorgeous Meg McGowan, aka Permacoach. Meg, it was such a fun conversation, wasn't it, with Meg?
Yes. It could have gone for hours. Actually, it went for hours. It's a 2-hour interview that we had to try and cut down, and she just wanted to keep talking. I tried to end the conversation about 3 times, and she's like, oh, you were trying to wrap things up, weren't you? Sorry. And just
she called us on it, didn't she? I think we could maybe have a series of Meg, because honestly her story is absolutely phenomenal. She's had such a diverse and colourful life, and I mean she's just a woman who's got such a big heart. And I mean, she's got her own garden going on, she's got her own stuff going on, then she does so much for other people. She's got her blog, Smarter Than Crows, which is an absolutely fantastic blog site. She writes for Permaculture Central Coast and does a lot with them as well. So she's a busy lady, and she just gives of herself over and over and over again. And I I thoroughly loved the conversation with Meg. I was there with her. I could have gone for hours too, but yeah, it would have been a
And
series
the first
of.
half, yeah. The first half of the interview is a lot about her like history and her previous role with the police force on the Central Coast and in Sydney, and then more towards the end, like current stuff that she's doing and what she's doing with Permacoach. And so yeah, if you don't like that beginning part, you can kind of skip through a little bit, but don't skip too far, because we do get into some juicy stuff about her garden and what she's doing and Smarter Than Crows. And yeah, she's such an amazing person to listen to and talk to.
She really is. And I think that, yeah, you can, you might want to break this one up into a couple of sessions, if I can get my words out. But I'm sure you'll enjoy it as much as what we did. So let's jump in.
So today we're joined by Meg, which I think a lot of people will know who you are in the permaculture world. So thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Before we get too into it, we just acknowledge where we're recording on. So where are we recording on today?
You're with me today. You're here. So we're in the Wanneroo country, in the Hunter Valley.
And what about you, Meg?
Oh, we're actually on disputed country, so you'll hear a lot of people call this Darkinjung. In fact, we were originally Walkaloa country, and due to massacres, those people are no longer here. And this land has also been home to the Guringai and Awabakal peoples, so very sad history locally.
Yeah, okay. Was that because of like the particular area being so close to the coast? Like, why is there a reason why that was?
I don't know. I don't know enough about the history to be clear about why or how. I imagine it was a combination of massacre and disease that wiped them out, like Aboriginal peoples across Australia. But this area in particular, I discovered we didn't have a version of the Aboriginal calendar, which of course, where there are existing Aboriginal peoples, there is an existing calendar, and they're fascinating because they're marvellous for anyone interested in permaculture, because they're all about connection to country and to the natural world. And they record things like, oh, well, when we see the whales off the coast, these are the foods that we eat, and these are the foods that we don't eat in order to preserve them and protect them. And of course, the absence of a calendar tells you something. It tells you that there was nobody left to preserve it.
That's incredibly sad, isn't it?
I love the different calendars you can get, because they're often separated into 5 or 6 or more seasons that we just don't think like that, and it's so based, like you said, in tune with the land, and very little details in seasons that we just don't really even acknowledge or appreciate, because we're not that in tune with living from and within the land anymore.
Yeah,
really interesting.
Yeah, we have imagined seasons, and we go, okay, well, it's now summer has stopped today. Okay, we are now in autumn. Okay, it will now not be hot. It doesn't quite work like that.
Yeah, it's one of the things we teach in our permaculture design course, is talking to people about, if you say to people, how many seasons do we have here on the Central Coast? And people go, oh, we've got 4. And you go, really? Do we really have 4? Because one of the things we hear when the calendar clicks over into what Europeans would call spring, and flipped, of course, because we have spring when they have autumn, etc. But one of the things that's interesting is people keep going, gee, it doesn't feel like spring, does it? Or when it gets to winter, people go, gee, where's winter? As if there's this disconnect between 4 completely superimposed seasons and what is actually happening on the ground. Yeah. So it's a really great lesson in the difference between observing and understanding your context and designing to your context, and imposing somebody else's pattern on the land. And it's as basic as what we do with things like time and seasons, where we say, we work an 8-hour day. Well, why do we work an 8-hour day? Why not a shorter day in winter and a longer day in summer? And how come lunch is in the middle of the day if we don't feel hungry when it's hot? And, it's that kind of stuff where you think about truly reconnecting to natural patterns includes making these kinds of observations and connections.
I used to work in a long daycare centre. Actually, I ran it, and we were looking into studies where they were taking clocks out of preschools and schools in general. And if we actually kind of just went with the flow of our day and how our bodies felt, if we were hungry or tired, and if it was, you know, sunny enough, we'd be outside, and, you know, how we'd just naturally be if we didn't have clocks to dictate what all of the teachers were supposed to be doing at certain times of the day. And it was so interesting to learn about, like really, really interesting.
Just really working with the rhythm, and flowing into that.
Yeah, we've got a great group locally called Wild Beings, apart from having just the coolest name, Wild Beings. And they live outside. You know, a lot of what they do is, and a lot of what they teach is, you know, how to make fire from scratch using friction, and how to tan hides, and how to forage food. And they do a lot of work with kids in that space, and you know, as a wonderful alternative to screen time. And they shared something today where they're going to be talking to a woman in New Zealand who just lives nomadically in the wilds of New Zealand. And her experiences of what happens when you actually get back in touch with those natural rhythms and you start responding to what's happening locally around you, as opposed to sitting in your air conditioning and deciding, you know, programming into your phone when you're going to go to sleep and wake up.
Yeah. Well, let's take it all the way back to the beginning, I guess. Can you tell us maybe how you discovered permaculture? Was it kind of like a slow burn? Did it just happen upon you? Were you brought up that way? How were you first introduced to it?
Look, I think I did come from a family. We were the weirdo family that had these big black plastic tubs out the back that we used to put all the bottles and cans into. And then once a month there was this great trip to the tip, and you had to sort them by colour, which meant smashing bottles into great big metal skips, which for kids was just the best fun. You know, and then you got to go to the tip shop and get a free toy from the tip shop, which, you know, now I can't imagine nowadays parents going, oh, it's contaminated, you know. So I did grow up with a lot of that. My father was, both my parents were English teachers, and then Dad was a politician. And so very early on, I was introduced to activism, particularly environmental activism, and the Save Raleigh's Island campaign here on the Central Coast, and then saving the red gum forest further north. So that was part of my DNA, I guess. And I was studying art in Sydney and walked into a bookshop looking for a book. I was on student money, so you buy one book and then you cherish it. And this book kind of sang to me from the bookshelf. And I got it home and I looked at the cover and thought, I'm living in a terrace house in Balmain, back when that was a cheap way to live. I'm living in a terrace house in Balmain. Why have I bought a book with a cow and a homestead on it? Like, what am I doing? It was Rosemary Morrow's Earth User's Guide to Permaculture, and and I thought, well, you know, I can't afford to go and buy another book, so I'm reading this one. I just completely fell in love with the book, and it turned out to be just one of the most extraordinary things I'd ever read. I was particularly taken by Rose call to our ethical obligation, and how in each chapter she'll say, you know, it's our ethical obligation to care for all living things, and to make sure that the future has clean drinking water, and to make sure that we protect those ridgeline areas where there's remaining forest, and explaining that connection, and helping me reconnect to this idea that, you know, we're not separate from nature, we're part of it. So the book just became hugely influential to me philosophically in terms of how I lived my life. So I started making different kinds of choices in terms of what in permaculture we refer to as zone zero, which is basically what happens inside the home. So even though I had no garden whatsoever, I was able to look at the ethics and the principles of permaculture and say, well, how else could I apply those within my own context, which is really the heart of permaculture. The heart of permaculture is take those ethics, take those principles, and then get to really understand your context and apply the ethics and the principles within those contexts. Rose says, I am yet to find a design task that cannot be improved by permaculture. And she should know because she's been into some of the harshest environments on the planet. So she goes into staging camps. Staging camps are the places that you go before you go to a refugee camp. So if you've ever seen footage of refugee camps and thought, boy, they're really terrible conditions to live in, imagine what the places are like before you get to the refugee camp and before you've been processed by United Nations staff. So she goes in there, she sleeps where the people sleep, she lives as they live, she eats what they eat, and she teaches them permaculture, and then achieves these amazing results where they build community and where they create places of safety for women and children, and where they share knowledge and resources, and where they deal with trauma, and coincidentally they grow some food.
Yeah.
So I think that coming at permaculture from, and I didn't realize it was a movement. I was just over there in the corner practicing permaculture for years and years and doing my own thing. I'm perhaps, I wouldn't say well known, but I am known for the fact that I applied it to the redesign of major crime in the New South Wales Police Force.
Yeah.
So my background is I retired as a detective superintendent of police. So to give you context, police force at the time was about 18,000 people, and 42 of them were detective superintendents. So that gives you an idea of where I am in that dendritic pattern. And we had a royal commission into, amongst other things, whether or not there was entrenched protection of pedophiles and whether or not there was entrenched corruption in major crime. And I was part of designing the response to that. And so, without mentioning the word permaculture, because you can imagine what a whole bunch of
crazy hippie
crazy hippie. But because really permaculture is systems thinking. So there was a point in my policing career where I started to become interested in management positions and entering into management training and looking at things like quality management and systems thinking and going, boy, there's a whole lot of similarity between this stuff and permaculture. I wonder why that is. I now know, of course, that David Holmgren dedicates one of his books to someone who's a very famous systems thinker. A lot of permaculture dropped out of systems thinking, so there's this very strong connection between the two. So it wasn't at all surprising. But what it meant was that I kind of hit the ground running in terms of management training, because it was oh, I understand all this. Yes, everything's connected. Pay attention to unintended consequences. Correlation is not causation. Every system is perfectly designed to get exactly the results it gets, and to change the outcome, you need to change the system. Well, that sounds a lot like permaculture, doesn't it? So I was very fortunate. I was in the police force at a period of time where they decided they were going to externally assess people's suitability for senior management positions. And I was encouraged by a senior officer to sit that particular, or to go through that particular assessment process. And the result I got said I was clever enough to be the Commissioner of Police, which really upset a lot of people.
I could imagine. That would have.
They were not very happy because my substantive rank at the time was Detective Senior Constable of Police, which is misleading because I actually never drew pay as a Detective Senior Constable. I'd always been offered opportunities to act up into higher ranks. So at the time I was an acting Inspector of Police, which is one rank off the rank that I achieved promotion into. But there was very much this view of, young female upstart, not waiting my turn, and how dare I go in there and make all these amazing reforms. I am very proud of the fact that the New South Wales Police major crime area used to be the subject of a huge corruption blow up around about every 3 to 4 years during the time I was in the police force. I left over, it's coming up to, we got to be coming up to 20 years now. I think it's 20 years this year since I left the police force, and we have not had a major corruption scandal in major crime in the New South Wales Police Force since the redesign.
Wow.
So that's got to count for something. I think some of that was the work we did at the time, and some of that was the way we designed the system. So it's not a thing that it's not a thing a lot of people have an interest in. But when I do it, people who say to me, "Can you sit down and explain to me what you did?" and I do, they go, "Oh, this is really simple, isn't it?" So essentially, think concentric circles. So instead of your usual organizational structure where you have chimneys and you have someone at the head of each chimney, that's a design that leads to corruption. People come in at the bottom, and whatever the culture is that's being set by the person at the top, that runs all the way through.
So you know what the old saying is about what flows downhill?
Well, and not only that, a fish rots from the head down is the other one.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So instead of that, if you put your command center as a circle in the middle, and then think about putting rotating circles, so a bit like zones, yes.
Yep.
So and then rotate them in. So we keep inspectors where they are. They're the subject experts. So you want the people who only ever want to work on homicide and don't want to be leaders to stay exactly where they are and get really good at homicide. So they are the stationary circle. But the commanders are much more generic. If you know how to run a homicide squad, you pretty much know how to run a child protection squad or a gun squad or a fraud squad. So you can move those commanders around. In terms of your investigative staff, you can move them in the opposite direction. So by moving them in the opposite direction, you're making sure that young staff get exposed to lots of different things. And then you introduce some way of circuit breaking the culture. So you give them direct contact to the chief of staff, which was me. Come and tell me if you see anything weird. You run a well-structured induction program when people first enter that sets culture really clearly. And there's lots in David Holmgren's got some great stuff in Retro Suburbia about the importance of culture setting, and Cecilia Macaulay makes the comment that you need to set culture early. You need to do it up front. You can't do it retrospectively. You can't later say, "Oh, yeah, we don't do that here." Yeah. You really need to bed that stuff in. So, here we are 20 years later. I mean, fingers crossed, because who knows what's happened to it since. I'm not in contact with anybody who's a part of it, but I do think we did a pretty good job.
Meg, the fact that, as you were saying, there'd been a pattern sort of every 3 to 4 years that there was, major corruption issues that were popping up. And then in the last 20 years, there hasn't been those huge waves that have come through. So that just shows that the system that you have put in place is working. Like you said, you've got no control over what happens with that system and how they may manipulate that into the future. But the fact that it's been implemented and it's been utilised, and those old problems are not still cropping up. So it shows that.
And I get there's a big maybe in all of that. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from the people who've come in after us, who've provided really great leadership and who've innovated and who've improved on the design. I don't want to take anything away from the senior leadership of the police force, because we've had some really good commissioners of police since then. But I do liken it. I had a bunch of master students turn up here once. I was asked to talk to them about police corruption. So I took them out and showed them around the garden. And I said, look, this is a paved area. Let's think of corruption like weeds, yes? Here's a paved area. It's not going to get any weeds. But you're not going to grow anything either. Yeah. And this is the most common approach to dealing with a problem, is to pave over it. So you stifle any creativity, any imagination, you bind people with rules, you prevent them from working outside rigid guidelines. And that's a pattern we've seen particularly throughout the public sector. So talk to anybody in teaching or nursing or policing or national parks or anywhere like that, and they'll say, I now spend most of my time proving that I'm not doing the wrong thing instead of doing the right thing.
And watching my P's and Q's and making sure that I'm not saying something that could be misconstrued in some way. Yeah, it really does stifle that creativity and that innovation and an ability to come up with solutions and have that solutions-based thinking, rather than, dare I say, a bit of a butt covering, kind of mentality that it can potentially create.
Yeah, and your next level up from that is your sort of standard annual cultivated garden. That's a lot of work. If you want to do that, you can do that, but you are going to have to keep pulling weeds out all the time.
Yeah.
And then you can look at a forest system. So the ultimate organizational model is a forest system. And I liken what we did with Major Crime to a forest system, which is let's work with human nature. Let's think about why people behave in corrupt ways, what it is about the culture that is either turning a blind eye to or creating an environment that fosters corrupt behavior. And then let's design it so that we naturally get healthy behavior within the organization. And that's exactly what we're doing in a forest system. There aren't weeds in a forest system. A forest system is a naturally abundant system, and it requires very little in the way of maintenance because we've paid attention to the patterns that we see in nature. And then we've accelerated the pattern of succession. So, when we put mulch on a garden, we're accelerating the pattern of succession. We're doing something that a forest would do over a really long period of time. When we take a tree that's 3 years old and bring it into a system and put it in the ground, we're accelerating that pattern of succession. So I'm on 3.5 acres here, and 1 acre of that is dedicated as Zone 5 because that's a big commitment to fair share. And the rest of it is, most of it is now forest garden that requires very little in the way of maintenance. And, we can leave that alone for weeks and weeks and weeks and go up there. And the only thing I have to do is to go, oh, look, here's a tree that's turned up all on its own. Or very occasionally, oh, that's, a camphor-laurel. No, I'd really rather not have a camphor-laurel in my forest system. Let's take that out. But that's about it. We have wallabies, we have possums, we have hundreds of birds. We have this really rich ecosystem going on. And that pattern is the same kind of thing that you apply in social permaculture to think about, how do people naturally behave? Most people don't get up in the morning planning to be incompetent. Most people naturally want to do well at the work that they're doing. They want to be recognized. People want agency. They want the capacity to safely make mistakes. I mean, here's the interesting thing about when people go, oh, it was an honest mistake. I say, well, there aren't dishonest mistakes.
Yeah. A dishonest mistake is something totally different.
A dishonest mistake is an intentional act and therefore not a mistake. So mistake, to create an environment where you can make a mistake and say, hey, that's on me, I made a mistake. Because what we saw in that organisation was that the most trouble that police got into occurred because they were trying to cover up a mistake or protect somebody else from the consequences of a mistake.
Yeah.
So if you don't have an environment where people can step up and say, look, I stuffed up.
Yep.
This is on me.
Yeah. And then be able to, have that they can then say, I've stuffed up, but here's a potential solution, or these are the things that I've considered, and then have their seniors or the team see it as an opportunity for a learning for the greater community, or the greater team, to say, well, what can we get from this, as opposed to you as an individual human have done something wrong.
Yeah, or even the opportunity to say, and can you help me? I don't have the answers.
Yeah.
Because I think that's another thing that people think they're meant to have all the answers. It's like, well, that doesn't work like that. To create an environment where you can go, I actually don't know and I need some guidance and help, and can you help me, or who can help me?
Yeah.
Because I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think too that if you don't have that at a small level, then the kinds of mistakes that you see in a policing environment are devastating, extremely damaging, potentially fatal mistakes. Where instead of people seeking support and advice, they rush into something, they overstep the boundaries of their power, and behave appallingly. And there are certainly consequences for that kind of behaviour. It's not a case of, oh, all mistakes are forgiven. It is a case of, well, I'm sorry, that's a mistake that's going to result in you not being able to be a police officer anymore.
Yeah,
or that's a mistake that's going to result in you going to jail, because that's the reality of being a police officer.
Yeah. So do you see, though, that often they're not isolated incidents? There's been some sort of ramp up to that through, again, behaviour and culture and acceptance of certain things. It's not that someone's been, an exemplary member for X amount of years, and then all of a sudden they just make one big mistake because, they were having an incompetent day. It's generally a build-up, right?
Yeah, look, I think some of it is very much systemic, and the thing we talked about previously where you've got a system of high level of accountability. So, someone, I think a couple of years back, did an analysis on how long it used to take to process someone following arrest back when I joined, compared to what that takes now.
Yeah.
So my first husband and I were both in the police force together. I was working at Balmain and he was working at King's Cross. And there were times when we would have a bit of an arrest off. And it was like, how many have you got and how good are they? I've locked up somebody for drugs and you've locked up somebody for drink driving and you've locked up. I mean, it really was a case of you could go out on the street, detect somebody doing the wrong thing, bring them back to the police station, conduct an interview with them and charge them, and then be back out on the street. Whereas most police are in circumstances now where to make an arrest means that's the rest of their shift off the street because of all these layers of accountability in terms of the information that needs to be recorded. And then they know they're recording it into an outdated system that doesn't give them any decent product at the end of it. So not only are you taking a long time to do something, you're not getting any value out of the time that you're investing. Now, see if you can figure this one out. If you're working in an organisation where making an arrest takes you away from doing work that you enjoy, sits you behind a desk to enter information into a computer that is of no value to you whatsoever, what's the natural consequence of that?
It doesn't get done.
Yep.
Well, you stop making arrests, don't you?
Yeah.
It doesn't get done.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the consequence from that is you lose good people because people get disenfranchised with the whole system, and then they say,
correct.
What am I doing here? It's pointless. This isn't what I thought it was. I'm out. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So it's just a snapshot of how important design is.
Yeah.
No matter where you go. And there's a similar problem in Department of Community Services where if you squeeze the money out of a place so severely that it's impossible for you to do a good job, then your choices are to do a bad job or to leave and do another job.
And that's been happening for many years as well. I was at Docs for a few years. Yeah, probably about 20 odd years ago, 19 odd years ago. And even then it was just a constant squeeze and a constant battle to get and to keep good people and then expect them to go over and above to the point of total burnout and then wonder why the work wasn't being able to get done effectively.
Yeah, look, I spent a big part of my career in child protection and people go, oh, it must have been stressful. And it was, but not for the reasons that people think it is. Talking to kids was something I enjoyed doing. Arresting people for doing horrible things to them was something I really enjoyed doing. But looking at a book with entries in it and the names of children waiting to be interviewed that ran to 20 names or 30 names, knowing that those children were in circumstances of risk and it was not going to be possible for me to get out there to interview them for weeks. That's stressful.
Yep. When
you're looking at a circumstance like that. And also the guys across the way in the drug squad are able to just go out and make drug arrests whenever they like. And I'm all, how about we borrow some of those guys and clear these 30, which of these is the more important policing issue? How do we, and this was the other thing about getting rid of that silo mentality, that you need an organisation where there's that flexibility to say, look, that stuff over there is a priority. When I did the submission to form the Child Protection Enforcement Agency, it was a case of, first of all, it was a case of saying either we are the only police force in New South Wales that doesn't have to deal with recidivist pedophiles, or we're the only police force, we're the only police force in Australia that doesn't have to deal with recidivist pedophiles, or we're the only police force in Australia that doesn't detect and arrest them because we don't have a squad that targets recidivist pedophiles. Yeah. Which of those do you think is the more likely?
Yeah, exactly.
So I basically went to each of the commanders because I'd been given approval to address the state commander's action team by the state commander. And so I thought, well, I'll meet with each of them first and ask them why not. Okay, tell me why I can't have one. And that was revealing. Someone gave me a coffee cup with an Einstein quote that said the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
I know, right? And I had spent most of my policing career banging on about why we needed this particular squad and hitting brick walls. And I read this and went, okay, what am I doing wrong? Oh, I'm only seeing this through my own paradigm. I'm not seeing it through anybody else's. So I organised to meet with the various regional commanders and say to them, why can't we have one? And I had one commander say to me, I just can't believe that anyone would do this to children.
Because it
Like
wasn't in their capacity to even remotely think like that. So therefore, how could anyone else?
Yeah, it was the most common response to why we weren't getting sufficient funding or support. It wasn't corruption. It was, I just don't want to believe that it happens. And if I pay attention to you and give you money, then I've acknowledged that human beings are capable of doing this, and I don't want to go there. I did have somebody say to me, where are we going to get the resources for this? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's only take them from areas that are less important than people having sex with children.
Good answer.
But this is,
there would not have been a lot of pushback from that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting exercise. I'd been told before I gave the presentation that I wasn't going to be successful, and about halfway through, the guy who was in the chair leaned over to me and said, all right, smartass, how many do you want for the squad? And I turned around and said 20, and he said, you can have 10. And I said, done.
10 was better than none.
That's it. Good negotiation.
Well, it's now, I think they're up to 150.
Wow.
That's brilliant.
Because, of course, the hardest journey is across the threshold. Once you've got it in place, once it's in place, then it's very easy for you to say, well, here's our workload. What would you like us to do with our workload?
Yeah, that's it. It gains momentum. Yeah.
Yeah. I had someone say we don't have any intelligence indicating that it's needed. And I said, yeah, and if we didn't have a drug squad, what would our drug intelligence look like?
Yeah, exactly.
6-year-olds aren't picking up the phone to report the fact that they're being sexually abused.
That's right.
So once you left the police force, did you go straight into Permacoach and what you're doing there?
Oh.
How did that journey come about for you?
So of course, I've always been practicing permaculture, and I've practiced permaculture at home. I've had at various times, people who've come to know me have said, can I come and learn? And I've said, sure, you can come and help me in the garden and learn side by side with me. So I'd always done that. Then I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer and given about 18 months to live.
Wow.
Luckily, they didn't. I know. Luckily, they didn't tell me I had 18 months to live. And that was 10 years ago, and I'm fine. So don't worry, there's not a shoe drop here. It's all good.
You're looking at a happy ending.
Spoiler alert. I'm fine. I had triple negative breast cancer. I had 4 tumours in my left breast. Everything about my cancer was bizarre. You're not meant to get it at my age. It's more common in young women. It's more common in black women. I am neither young nor black. And normally your first tumour's in your breast and your second is somewhere metastatic. And I had 4 right in one place. So everything about that was bizarre. I had very aggressive chemotherapy, which killed 3 of the tumours. And the 4th tumour was on the way out when it was surgically removed. And then I had radiation therapy, and it turns out I have a superpower. And my superpower is that I am radiation resistant.
Wow.
So at the end of, I know, right? So at the end of,
no, that was a thing.
No, I didn't either. And had I known it was a thing, I would have said, is there a way that you can test me for that before I spend 6 weeks lying under radiation? So at the end of that treatment, there was still some things showing up on a scan. And my doctor said, it's probably nothing, calcification, something like that. And it turned out, initially they thought it was recurrence, and recurrence of triple negative is usually terminal. Not always. And eventually when they checked it, it turned out to be my original cancer, which is how they knew I was radiation resistant and not dying, which would have been good to know before I'd told my daughter I was dying. That would have been much better. Oh, terrible.
Oh.
So I came out of cancer treatment with an inability to remember my phone number. And my thinking was, if I go and do a course in something that I love and that I used to know really well, maybe that will help to reconnect hopefully some of those neural pathways are still there under the snow. Turns out that works really well for anybody else recovering from chemotherapy or brain fog, is go learn something. I also learnt the cello because I read all of the stuff on brain plasticity, and it turns out learning a musical instrument is good for your brain. And if you're married to a musician, he'll say, play something you love, and you'll say cello without realizing it's a fretless instrument that's very difficult to play.
I go like with, I don't know, the triangle.
I know, right? Piano, Meg, piano, no, cello. So I've played cello therapeutically for a long time, and I say that because that's an indication that I'm destined to never play it publicly, but I love it.
Yeah.
And I do think the process of rebuilding my brain, it's highly likely I permacultured my brain. I think I actually, and my daughter made the observation recently, and she said, there's two versions of you, Mum. There's you before cancer and there's you after cancer. And I said to her, which do you prefer? And she said, I love both of you, of course. But I really like this one a lot better.
You've essentially reprogrammed through permaculture. You reprogrammed your brain.
Yeah, and then it was a case of, well, I've got this bonus round, when I got to the 5-year mark, the only good thing about triple negative breast cancer is if you make it to 5 years, so it's rarer, it's a lot more aggressive, you're more likely to die from it than the other breast cancers, but if you get to 5 years, your risk reverts to normal.
Wow.
So, and there's no ongoing treatment for it, there's no ongoing medication. You get to the end of treatment and they go, good luck. So during treatment I discovered something called acceptance commitment therapy. And I'd previously done cognitive behavioral therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder and was really good at it, but cognitive behavioral therapy left me feeling broken. I had automatic negative thoughts and my brain was dysfunctional and I needed to re-script. Acceptance commitment therapy said, no, actually there's nothing wrong with your brain is fine. It's just trying to keep you safe. You just need to make friends with it instead of being a bully. Oh, says I, that's really helpful. It's particularly helpful when your so-called automatic negative thought is waking up at 3:00 in the morning with the idea, oh God, my cancer's back. Because that's not an automatic negative thought. That is a real and legitimate fear.
Yeah.
So CBT is of no use to you in that circumstance. So I ended up, I blogged all the way through my cancer treatment, and the blog became rather popular. And there was this lovely woman on it who said, you should write a book about that acceptance commitment therapy stuff. So I did, and then started spruiking the book. And, I would stand up and talk about ACT, so acceptance commitment therapy is referred to as ACT. And people would buy copies of the book, and people would say, can you write one that doesn't have cancer in it just for everybody else? And I'd go, sure, I'll do that. And I came home after one of these things and I said to Graham, I'm really glad I wrote the book, but this isn't what I want to be doing. I really want to do permaculture. The stuff I really enjoy is saving the planet and doing something to help reverse climate change and anthropocentric damage to the natural world. That's where my heart is. But as long as I've got this bonus round, I should do that, because there's lots of people in the space doing great things in terms of mental health and helping people with trauma and all that kind of stuff. And I wrote the book. There we go. Book's out there.
I've done my bit.
Well, I make almost no money off it, because the whole idea was write it, put it out there. And, you know, every so often someone sends me a message saying, oh, my God, that book changed my life. And I go, great, that's terrific. Want to do permaculture?
Come to one of my courses.
So I started, so my blog is Smarter Than Crows.
Mm-hmm.
And I started the blog because my friend Jordan Newen, who's just a hugely clever person, said to me, I'm writing a book, Meg, and I want your perspective on artificial intelligence. And I said, well, you know, I know nothing about artificial intelligence. He said, yes, but I want you to take your permaculture brain and go and research artificial intelligence. And so that's how the blog started, because I said to him, well, I'm familiar with this platform. I can start writing this blog. You can just get in there and read it whenever you like. And then I'll, you know, anything I'm thinking about permaculture or whatever, I'll start putting it in there. Next thing I know, I'm trailing followers. I'm going, oh, apparently people are interested in what I'm writing about permaculture. That's surprising. And then we had friends who'd done a course with us who came back. They'd been to Victoria and visited David Holmgren, and they came back and said, oh, yeah, there's a whole lot of conversation around what you're writing down at Meliadora. Oh, now it's getting scary.
Shit just got real.
Then Dan Palmer contacts me, and I'd followed Dan for quite some time. Bless Dan, rest in peace, my lovely Dan. And then Dan Palmer contacts me and says, oh, do you want to do a podcast? I'm like, sure. And then some months later, contacts me to do a second one. And, you know, all that stuff to me is still surprising. I still go, okay, I'm just expressing opinions and writing stuff and making observations and applying my, albeit rather unusual brain, to whatever's in front of me. So it's been nice that people have resonated with it, and it's been nice that, you know, sometimes I call stuff out and there's this huge backlash and you go, whoa, we touched a nerve there.
We touched the right nerve.
Maybe, you know, I think I'm responsible for the phrase selfish sufficiency. So well, you know, self-sufficiency to me is incredibly ableist. It's also from my perspective, it's not consistent with permaculture, because permaculture is very much about returning to our own true nature, and we are a herd species, or a pack species, if you like. We are meant to live in community. Also, from an environmental point of view, having lots of little homesteads where everybody owns one of a thing, that's not environmentally sustainable at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, sustainability is the other word I like to have a go at, because, you know, when you really sit with what sustainable looks like, I don't know anybody who's living sustainably.
You're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. You don't stay still. You're not sustainable.
Yeah, but also, if sustainability means I can live this way forever and ever and ever and ever and have no ongoing impact on the planet, which is more, you know, a pretty fair definition of sustainable. Mm-hmm. In order for it to be sustainable, then the resources I'm taking out, the things I'm doing with them, the products that are coming through, all of the waste that is or isn't being generated, that's all part of a giant equation. Mm-hmm. That means if I live this way forever and ever and ever and ever, and my descendants live this way forever and ever and ever, then there is no accumulated damage to our environment. Okay, show me anyone who's doing that isn't part of an indigenous culture in a remote part of the world. Because to my way of thinking, only people in indigenous cultures in remote parts of the world, and by the way, not all of them, mm-hmm. are living in a way that is sustainable. So, and, you know, this language matters, because when permaculture gets attacked, it gets attacked by people who say, well, hang on, you can't actually feed yourself off a suburban block. You know, you can't actually live sustainably. You can't actually be self-sufficient. So unpacking all of that stuff and saying, well, actually, permaculture never said that.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff got added in later on. When you go back to the designer's manual, and you go back to Permaculture 1 and Permaculture 2, and when you read the stuff that David Holmgren's written more recently. Permaculture is a design system.
Mm-hmm.
The advantage of it being a design system is that you can apply it in any geographical context. You can also apply it in any social context, and you can apply it at any point in time. So you could uplift permaculture, put it in your time machine, send it 300 years into the future, and you would still be able to apply the permaculture ethics principles and design process within that context. So it's not a lifestyle choice. It's a design pattern. And it's a design pattern that we've seen people use. So we've had students use it to redesign a motor mechanics business. We've got someone who does decluttering, and instead of sending it all to the tip, she's sourced all these various places where things can be redistributed rather than wasted. Wow. So, you know, when you talk people through this process of, well, what would that look like if we permacultured it? So a big part of what we're doing with Permacoach was a consequence of me applying the permaculture design model to what was happening in permaculture education more broadly. Yeah. So when I started, most PDCs were around about $2,000, $2,500, and you went and did a course for 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, you got given a permaculture design certificate. The course I did to reboot my brain was done on a part-time basis. That person's no longer teaching permaculture, which allows me to say it was not a very good course. If they were still teaching, I wouldn't say that, but that person's no longer teaching. And I think perhaps there was a bit of realization there. There were still aspects of that course that were wonderful, and one of them was that it was taught on a part-time basis. And I thought, how on earth would anybody process this information in 2 weeks?
We've had those same conversations. We did the protracted course with Brett at Limestone, and I went home the first weekend and I said to Oscar, my husband, I said, I do not know how people do this over the course of 14 days back to back and then retain any of that information, because it is just, you know, it is so much to think and consider and go back and unpack. And I have no idea how people do it in 2 weeks. Yeah. It blows my mind.
And we used to get in the car at the end of the day, because we both did the course together with our husbands last winter. And so we'd get in the car to drive back down the Buckets Way, and we wouldn't talk the whole way down because both of us are just absorbing still. Like it was, you could almost hear the crunch and the grind of, we talked about this and that, and how does that relate to that? And I don't really understand that, so I'm going to park that for now, and I'll come back to that when I've got a little bit more And you can see us both going through that, and then of course we'd get home, and then it would be, you know, we want to do everything all at once because we're, you know, fresh students and we're so excited.
Which is not very permaculture.
You know, it's like, just calm it down. Let's just, you know, take, you know, very small, progressive steps. You know, let's apply things in little bite-sized chunks, to, you know, even though we're doing the, you know, our design at the same time. But it was far easier for me, and even then I still haven't absorbed everything. I go back over, I was looking at some notes the other day, and I'm like, I don't even remember this, because so much information. And you can only take in so much at a given time before your brain just goes, okay, that's it, I'm full, I'm done for the moment, I need to absorb. Look, it's really interesting to me, and again, there are people who disagree with me, and there are some people doing really good 2-week courses, and it is about, for some people, the 2-week course is their only option. You know, if you're working full time and you've got a busy life and you've got holidays and you go, right, I'm going to do a 2-week course. I also think that if you're talking about the permaculture greats, so, you know, if you're talking about learning with David Holmgren, if you're talking about learning with Ro Morrow, and by extension with Liz Bastian in the Blue Mountains, you know, these people who are just hands down some of the greatest names in permaculture, then you really, it really justifies traveling. So Graham went and did David Holmgren's PDC with him in Victoria. But here's the thing, if we're talking about cooperating with nature, and by extension we're considering human nature, what do we know about how human beings learn? And, you know, what we know about how human beings learn is that we have a limited capacity to take in complex information, particularly if we're not applying it.
So
Yes.
one of the things we started throwing around was this idea of, well, what if we started running a course where people worked in the garden in addition to learning, so that you had both a mental break from the learning, and then you also had this hands-on experience of whatever the theory had been. So just in terms of best practice in teaching, that was appealing. There was also this thing about, how do we stay on this 3.5 acre property as we age, because we're both in our 60s. So, and one of the things that Retro Suburbia asks you to think about is, well, what are your plans as you get older? We would like to die here, ideally. Not today, but at some point in the future, that would be ideal. And so how do we now retrofit our own design to make it easier for us to manage? But also, where are we going to get the labour from when we're not capable of doing that ourselves? And so initially the idea was, well, how about we generate income by teaching permaculture, and then we pay someone to come in and help with the gardening. And then we start thinking about, how about if instead of doing that, we teach in the morning, people help out in the garden in the afternoon. That's improved learning outcome for them, but that also then pays for the course. Yeah. The big box that ticked for us was accessibility, because we're really passionate about making permaculture more available to more people. And we're also really passionate about getting more permaculture happening on the ground. That's our performance indicator, not how many students did you put through your course. Because the other thing I saw, I've done more than a couple of PDCs. I think I say to people, do if you could do one every 5 years, that would be ideal. Yeah. If every 5 years you could afford to, or even if you do some of the free online stuff, because each time you do it, it reminds me very much of the way Indigenous people learnt and remembered things. That if you don't have a written way of recording. So that's very much inspired the way I teach. So I start with a scaffold, which is a framework that we teach at introductory level. And that scaffold remains the same. It remains the same all the way up through to PDC. And we've also done advanced PDC, and the scaffold is unchanged. Yep. What changes is the level of complexity. Yep. So you layer in the complexity. And what I like to think is that once we've given people this scaffold, when they go and do another PDC with someone else, even though that person doesn't use necessarily, although more people are, even though that person doesn't necessarily use my scaffold, they can take that knowledge and hang it somewhere within that framework, and it helps them to remember it and to then apply that knowledge. So one of my biggest concerns with the 2-week course that I did with Milkwood, which was, Milkwood's PDC was just stellar. People came from overseas to do Milkwood's PDC. It's some of the best teaching I've ever seen. Just really creative, sticky stuff. So even though it was 2 weeks, a lot of it was so well taught, it stayed with you. Lots of experiential stuff, lots of game-based learning. It was and greatly inspired the way I teach. And the interesting thing about it, though, was that even though I came away from it going, yeah, what am I doing now in my own property and with my own permaculture, the group that they set up for all of us to stay in touch, only about 4 of us bothered to interact. Yeah. And I noticed that some of the people who were on the course were then on to the next thing. Yeah. Oh, I'm off at a yoga retreat in so-and-so, or I'm off climbing a mountain in such and such. So first of all, the people were from a very particular social class. They tended to be, middle class, from fairly wealthy backgrounds. You weren't seeing people from marginal communities. You weren't seeing a lot of, you were seeing some ethnicity, but a lot of it was wealthy middle class young people from overseas coming here to do courses. And then a lot of those people were having a really great time doing a 2-week permaculture course and then going off and doing something else. It's not to say, of course, that at some point the permaculture doesn't kick in. And I've known people where that's happened, but I really want it to be transformational. I want people to be so permacultured by our training that they can never be unpermacultured. That's what we're going for. I did I did have someone who, she's not done the course. She was because we use a real property for our group design, and she was one half of the team that owned the property. And I know she follows me on social media. And she said to me once, I thought of a great slogan, Meg, putting the cult back into permaculture. And of course, I told my daughter, and my daughter said, "Oh, Mum, you can't say that. There are people who've actually survived cults. That's really triggering and inappropriate." I said, "Oh, darling, I'm not actually having the t-shirts made. It's okay. Calm down. It's okay."
Just have a
but it did make me laugh, and we did consider getting them made for permaculture, or going to permaculture convergence with that on our t-shirts, and then thought, no, it might not go down very well. Let's not do that. But yeah, we really want to see people go from a place of curiosity to a place of enthusiasm, but also for that to be practical.
Yeah.
That we see stuff actually happening on the ground.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what was the point?
Isn't it? It's taking that newfound knowledge and those concepts and actually starting to apply and test and see what works. Do I have this understanding right? Let's put this into action. Do I have it right? Is this going to work for me? No, it's not going to work for me. Why is that? Then start to explore, is it the context? What are the reasons why? And as you said, unless you're doing the thing, you don't retain the thing. It's like anything. You could read a textbook and think, wow, that is absolutely amazing. And then you close it and walk away and expect, that in 12 months' time someone asks you a question, you go, oh yeah, I'm going to remember that. Do you have to practice?
Yeah, and it's not our nature. It's not how we learn. We know it's not how we learn. So why haven't we upgraded our teaching accordingly?
Yeah.
And this is one of the really, I love that the Dalai Lama once said, if science can disprove Buddhism will need to change. Not defending a faith based on faith, but basically saying what we do is science-based, and if science disproves it, we'll need to change the religion. And I think that's the test we apply to permaculture, is to say, look, if we run what we're doing through the permaculture design system and we find it lacking, then we need to change it.
Yep.
We need to, in the same way that we would in a garden, if we look at something in a garden and go, what was I thinking? That's so not putting something to its highest use. That's so not relative location. That's so not cooperating with nature. Quick, change it, or slowly change it, either way. but it is that thing where too often you see people imposing some kind of an ethic onto something, and then you see the hypocrisy of their own behavior. And I think because of my policing background, that idea of integrity was really important to me. So we used to talk about integrity in policing as two intersecting circles, where your ethics are on one side and your behaviors on the other, and you seek to increase the amount of overlap between the two. So one of the things that we designed into it is a principle which reads, align your behavior with the three core ethics. So, ultimately this isn't about having some ethical thinking over here and some behavior over there. It's about how are those two things connected to each other, and not just how are they connected, but to what extent. What, not just is there earth care, tick.
Yeah.
To what extent can I see the earth care in this design? To what extent can I see the people care in this design? To what extent can I see the fair share? I also introduced a design cycle, and that was inspired very much by Dan Palmer, that Dan said, the difficulty is we don't actually have a design process. And I thought to myself, well, it's not like there aren't hundreds of them out there in the world that we could very quickly adapt. He was right. He was absolutely right. Up until Dan, the curriculum was very much, here's the ethics, here's the principles, here's some strategies, elements, tools, and techniques. And please show us your design. And somehow you were meant to find your own bridge between the ethics and the principles and these broadly described strategies, and the elements, tools and techniques and where you were going to put them without there actually being a process. So we have a 4-stage design cycle that starts with learning, and learning is where are the ethics and principles currently evident and to what extent, as well as all the usual observation. So one of our other principles is design from the macro to the micro. So what are the macro things impacting this site? Like, what's your rainfall? Where are your sun angles? Or what climate are you in? What's your soil like? What's your bedrock? What's the history? What's the culture? All those kinds of things. The second stage is dream. And my favorite thing for dream is to say, if this was the world's best example of permaculture in this context, what would that look like? World's best. Not just an example, but it is really, really good permaculture. If people walked in here and went, wow, you totally get permaculture. And of course, that always comes back to alignment with the ethics. I saw a presentation at the Brisbane Convergence by somebody involved in something that they're calling ocean permaculture, where the presentation went through all of David Holmgren's principles and showed how what they were doing aligned with each of the principles. It was hugely problematic for me because it included images of underwater cities.
Wow.
And it used the language of capitalism. So it used language like, monetizing and leveraging and returns on profit. And, I'm sitting there thinking, why am I feeling so uncomfortable about this? And I went off and wrote something and David Holmgren was a supporter of this particular presentation. I went off and wrote something for David where I used each of his principles to defend strip mining.
Yeah.
And said, so, here's, and you couldn't tell, it was observe and interact, we do this, this, this. And it was each of the principles. And you read it and you get to the bottom of it and it is, our business is strip mining. And my point was, if you don't hook back to those ethics, if you don't hook back to the ethics of earth care, people care and fair share, you can use the principles to justify just about anything.
Yeah, because the principles are the principles. They're the tools that you're using within the system, but they're not are we doing the right thing?
Yeah, so without that ethical foundation, it's very easy for them to be misused. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we see is a skewing towards people care. Yeah. Because we're human beings and we naturally skew things towards our own comfort because we're human beings. And left to it, so there's a lovely systems thinking principle. Left to their own devices, people will design systems to suit themselves, which is something we see all the time. Left to our own devices, we'll design systems to suit ourselves. Why wouldn't we? Okay, how do you stop people from designing systems to suit themselves? You give them a higher purpose. Yeah. So you talk to them about an ethical commitment or an ethical obligation, and that causes you to then redesign. And the other way it gets used, of course, is for getting people to focus on who their customers are. So when you say to people, yeah, I know you would like to do it that way, but actually we're in the business of doing this thing for our customers. And that's why you can't do it that way. And that was a common one when police said, why can't we just all work 9 to 5? Oh, well, it's actually not about police being able to go home for dinner.
See, the problem with that is no one sort of told the other side of the equation, the criminals, that it's only a 9 to 5 gig, and at 5 o'clock they get to knock off.
Right?
They also get public holidays and weekends off. I'm sure they'll be fine.
Yeah. So I think, and then we talk about planning, and we talk about making sure that the ethics and principles are evident in the plan. And then I added a whole module on implementation, which was also missing. There wasn't a standard implementation module, and that's problematic, isn't it? You say to people, look, you've got this really great plan. Congratulations, here's your certificate. That's difficult then, because I don't know what I'm doing first, and I don't understand about the cascade of implementation, and I don't understand about maintenance, and I don't understand about designing it in. So we've put an implementation module into the curriculum for that purpose. So, I mean, that's a kind of a broad overview, but there were whole elements of it. Oh, the other thing we do is most PDCs, the first time you see anybody else's design work is, well, it used to be more and more people are changing based on what we've done, but it used to be the second last day of the PDC. that people would get out their individual designs. And I've been on PDCs where those individual designs have come out and you kind of go, oh dear, they're about to give that person a design certificate.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is that at that stage, it's very difficult to say to somebody, yeah, sorry, you haven't actually demonstrated the ethics and the principles in that design. We're not giving you a certificate. Particularly when they've paid you $2,500 for the course. And there's a reason why it's difficult for you to say that, because actually you would have to admit to the poor quality of your own teaching. Because if you've taught well, you should never be in a position where someone puts a design on the table and you go, oh dear.
Yeah.
That's on the teacher, that's not on students. That means you didn't teach well. So at every stage of the design, our students share what they're doing with each other.
Yeah.
So when they do base maps, they all share their base maps. And when they do a rocks analysis, which is my redesign of the SWOT, when they do a rocks analysis, they share all their outcomes. And we do a full session on problem solving where they say, this is where I'm stuck, and where other people in the class come up with solutions for how they're going to get unstuck from the problems that they're facing. So the other thing that we're doing there is, in terms of how we permacultured our permaculture, the other thing we're doing there is we're building really strong communities. So a lot of teaching is very hero based. It's, I'm the hero of permaculture, come sit at my feet and gaze at me adoringly, and I shall bestow upon you my wisdom. And I'm the opposite. I'm here to facilitate your learning, and you will learn more from each other and from this garden than you will learn from me. And I'm just the facilitator. And if I do this well, I should be able to teach any of you to teach this course.
Oh, I love that.
Because it's not about the knowledge that I hold in my head. It's about the pattern of facilitating a really good course. So the test for that is coming up in April, when my husband Graham's going to do his first solo PDC.
Oh.
So Graham's going to
How does
Graham's going to take
feel about that?
You know what? He's done some absolutely stellar intros. So we do an intro over 4 days where people learn in the morning and work in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And the last one I said to him, I said, look, you know you're doing great, I know you're doing great, but do an evaluation. Like get the actual feedback from the students. And he was blown away. You know, he got this feedback from students saying, oh, we're talking essentially a 2-day course. People are giving him feedback like, this has been transformational. This has changed my life. This has completely changed my thinking. Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't know this. You know, like, so I think he's very much shored up by that. He's certainly got the knowledge. He's certainly got the capability. I think, like anybody doing anything for the first time, there's a bit of trepidation.
Yep.
Look, one of the real advantages of teaching part-time is you really only need to teach it 2 days at a time.
Yeah.
So you can spend the week in between thinking about what you're teaching. So I say to people who are reluctant to teach, look, jump in and do it. Beck Richardson, who's one of our graduates, and Beck recently. So Beck Richardson had this. So Beck taught an intro with Graham, and before it, I said, "How you feeling, darling?" And she said, "Well, you know, Meg, it's a pancake." I said, "What do you mean a pancake?" She said, "Well, you know, when you make a pancake, that first one, it's never quite right, but it's still a pancake."
Yeah.
And your second one's going to be better. And I thought, what a brilliant attitude to have to teaching your first course. So, you know, to anyone out there interested in teaching, look, we need more people teaching permaculture, and we particularly need more people teaching it in the alternative economy the way we do.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to ask you about that actually. Do you think that students are more engaged with the course and then with the community that they're building in the course because it's part of that concept of the alternative economy?
Oh, look, absolutely. It's a completely different experience. And I supported someone else locally who wanted to do a paid course. So we did a kind of a piggyback where I taught it 1 week and she taught it the following, and it was a paid course. The dynamic's completely different, and I won't do a paid course again.
Yeah.
We do give people the option of a kind of buyback on hours if they can't work the hours, just because it gives people that safety of knowing, well, you know, if I'm really buggered and I want to go home an hour early, I can pay $25 and go home an hour early. And that we have had some people who've just preferred to pay. I don't think they get as much out of the course.
Yeah.
I think the working together in the garden and the problem solving so usually what we do is we give people a task, and then we say to them, now you need to figure out the best process for completing this task.
Yeah.
And if I'm observing them and I can see that there's some inefficiency in terms of their energy, I'll go ask them questions. I'll like, so which elements of nature do you think you're cooperating with here?
So instead of
they all look at each other and I'll say, what about gravity? Have we thought about gravity? Oh, they go, gravity, right. Even just talking to them about my own processes for things like, you know, how we move mulch and how I've come up with what for me is the most energy efficient way to move it. And I work it in a certain way and we put it down in a certain way. All of that is permaculture. All of that is helping them to understand the practical application of the principles. There's a lot of stuff we've done here where we've innovated just because we were working within our own context, and then we've applied the ethics and the principles to what we're doing. So the most recent stuff has been, what are we going to do about plastic? Because a lot of permaculture was very plastic dependent, and now we know about microplastics. Our ethical obligation is to come up with alternatives. So we've introduced the cupcake beds, which are our raised metal beds using repurposed metal. And that's also part of us aging. So we've built really, really high beds. They're not low beds. They're really high. And we've put oyas, which are ceramic pots, into the middle as our irrigation rather than using plastic irrigation. We're using the same model now for all our compost bins. So we use metal compost bins with hessian bags on top instead of plastic. And we've still got 2, I think, ancient plastic bins. And as they retire, we won't be replacing them with more plastic. So it is that thing where I draw the permaculture system as a tree with the ethics and the principles and the strategies and the design process at the lower part. And then the elements, tools and techniques are at the top of the tree. And just like the foliage at the top of the tree, a lot of that stuff drops down and fertilizes the tree and helps us to grow new ideas. So things keep cycling around and around and around. And I do think that's a really critical thing for anybody practicing or teaching permaculture, is to have a look at what are we still doing that we should have shed? What are we still teaching that we should have upgraded? Once again, Rosemary Morrow has been hugely inspirational. Rose turned 80 and she's just released a completely updated version
we get that as
of what used to be the Earth User's Guide, and she's changed it to, so people probably aren't familiar, but Earth User's Guide originally was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reference to a lot of the books during that period of time that were about a something user's guide to something. So, you know, people would bring out a motorbike user's guide to maintenance or a something user's guide to something. So it was the title was a cultural reference. The second edition was obviously in recognition of the fact that it had just been a hugely popular book. But even in the title, she's looked at the old title and gone, no longer appropriate, I'm updating it. So it's now the Earth Restorer's Guide to Permaculture. And, you know, that she remains my greatest role model in permaculture, quite apart from the fact that she's just a genuinely compassionate and decent human being. Her willingness, based upon new information, to say, I'm now jettisoning that from my PDC and I'm now teaching this instead. Or here's something that now needs to be included in the PDC. She's truly inspirational. And the book, the Earth User's Guide, has been the standard textbook for PDCs for a really, really long time. The Earth Restorer's Guide is set to replace it. It's just and again, it's her lovely writing style. Rob Alsop has been her illustrator since he put the cows on the cover of the first edition. So the cow that I was talking about, that's Rob Alsop. Wonderful illustrator for making the complex for taking complex concepts and translating them into really easy to understand illustrations. Just absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I think
I've been
that's
through the book a few times, and every now and then I'll just, if I'm having a morning coffee and I've got 10 minutes, I'll just pick it up. I'll just flick and open to wherever. Like, it's not a strategic thing. It's just, I'm going to have a look at this part today. And yeah, the concepts, like, you look at it and go, that is actually quite a complex way of thinking. But the demonstration, you're like, well, of course, like, this is so, plain as the nose on your face, obvious. Like, of course, this is the best way to do this particular thing. But when you actually dig into the concept itself, like, it has so many different layers and complexities. But it's it's an amazing book. It really is.
I feel like
look, I think when we start, it's a bit like the difference between the ringtone on a phone, although now ringtones on phones are quite complex, but so I'm a fan of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. You can get it as a ringtone. Yeah. So when you do an introduction to permaculture, what you're learning is a ringtone. What you're getting is a basic structure. When you do a PDC, what you're getting, if you do an ordinary PDC, what you're getting is hearing a bit of Beethoven's Ninth on the radio. And if you're doing a really good PDC, what you're getting is going along to Carols by Candlelight, and a really good choir turns up and sings Ode to Joy, and you go, oh my God, what's that? Yes. And the more you progress in permaculture, the more you realize, oh wait, it's part of an orchestra playing a much longer piece of music.
This bit.
Oh, imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, and wait, it's also part of a culture of writing a type of music that goes in all these other dimensions. So one of the challenges of permaculture is to get away from fundamentalism. It's to be expansive and to be inclusive and to recognize, as Brett Cooper does. And Brett Cooper is one of my great inspirations as well, because you see, Brett's a really great example of somebody who totally gets the ethics and the principles of permaculture and keeps looking for more and more innovative ways to apply them within a very tight context. That property, every time I go there, Brett's excited to show me what he's done. He doesn't stop.
And there's
improving it.
New. Always something new.
Yeah, always. And improving it and improving it and improving it. Nikki's just endlessly inspirational in terms of taking things and transforming them in ways where you go, I wasn't going to grow that, now I'm going to grow that.
Yeah.
So their contribution, their collective contribution to getting more people interested in growing unusual things and in preparing unusual things and in just sitting with those ethics and principles. They're amazing. And, I think that's the property that I say to people. If you want to see really good permaculture design, go and have a look at the Limestone Permaculture website. He's got his design up on the site.
Yeah.
And go have a look and ask yourself, what is it about that makes that such a great design? I would add, because I am passionate about Zone 5. Brett doesn't have a Zone 5, and there's a reason he doesn't have a Zone 5. It's because that property was originally set up as a commercial farm. So he needed to be able to produce marketable, resellable things, and that's why and it's really interesting to look at the difference between our property and Brett's, because we've never been interested in selling food to other people. So where ours is much more of a forest garden and it's much more of a foraging garden. So, if I can walk out this time of year, I want to be able to walk outside and bring in a handful of cherry tomatoes every day, because that's what we'll eat every day.
Yeah.
What I don't want is 20 kilos of cherry tomatoes every day.
Yeah. And that goes to show, though, isn't it, that it's the same ethics, it's the same principles, but it's the context in which you're doing it. And the context isn't just your site. Your context is your life and how you want to be able to interact with your garden and with your home and your family and what that means for you. And as you mentioned earlier, as we age as well, and we've had those conversations. I mean, I'm late 40s, my husband's 50. And even we're having those conversations now around, I've got the design up there. And the more I look at that, I go, that's actually not going to work for me in 10 years' time. So do I want to do this for a short period and then change it up, or do I want to be planning for the future and have that in mind? So again, it comes down to that context of what are you trying to achieve, with your land as well.
I love the way you've brought that back to context, because I think one of our favourite games, Brett and I love to sit around and talk about principles. Actually, we just love to sit around and talk. But
talk?
Are you kidding, right?
Yeah, hi, have you met me? So you can imagine what it's like when I think perhaps Nikki just rolls her eyes and goes and hides in the kitchen when I turn up. It's like, well, that's Brett and Meg gone for the rest of the day. I know Graham's like, nah, I'm good. This will be me hovering around in the background while you and Brett do your thing for the next 6 hours. He's wonderful. So look, I really love the way you've brought that back to context, because I do think that's the missing principle. I mean, I have it in design from macro to micro, which for a lot of people say patterns to details, but I think that's not clear. People go, what do you mean patterns to details? And I did see an example of someone who I considered to be quite a gifted designer, who thought that meant he should take a pattern from somewhere else in nature and impose it on the land. So the design he came up with, when I looked at it, I said, I'm very interested in what the inspiration is for the layout that you've chosen. And he said, well, it's based on the female reproductive system.
Interesting. Yeah.
And obviously this is not someone who'd done my PDC, he'd done someone else's PDC. And I don't know if it was their teaching or his interpretation of their teaching, but his understanding of patterns to details was take a pattern from nature and apply it to the site. That's not my understanding of what patterns to details is meant to mean. But I do think it's confusing, and I think people get caught up in things like Fibonacci sequences and golden means and the mysticism of patterns and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you say design from the macro to the macro isn't just about patterns. The macro is also considering what are the big issues confronting us as a species. So we do need to think about climate change. We do need to think about microplastics. We do need to think about all of these massive issues that we're having to address, and then work our way back to our own site, so that we are part of the solution to those problems, and not just a little prepper enclave waiting for the world to end. That one of the things that we show people is how easy it is to make topsoil. So we make a lot of topsoil. I can make topsoil that, I can put my shovel into the ground after 18 months and have topsoil that comes all the way up to the neck of the shovel. And I can do that because I'm on clay. That's the secret. If you're on sand, you're going to find it really hard to do that. But if you're on clay, building topsoil is, what's my favorite thing to grow? Soil. I grow soil. If I grow good soil, everything else looks after itself. But one of the things that we point out is that the reason that the soil is so black is that it's full of carbon, because it's full of life. So how much carbon have I drawn down if over 10 square meters I've made half a meter of topsoil? And how much more if I then plant that out with a forest garden? And you do the maths of that compared to the maths of lawn and its fossil fuel use, and you think about what happens every time you teach a person forest gardening, and that person gets rid of their lawn and replaces it with the type of, or gets rid of most of their lawn. We've got a little bit left for parking, and we keep it for parking because it's still better than paving. It is at least photosynthesizing, and it is a fire break, and it is a buffer between the rest of the garden and our zone 5, and it's useful for parking. So, but but most of the rest of the property is of 3.5 acres. Most of the rest of the property is not lawn.
Wow.
There's a little bit there's a little bit left. I'm slowly encroaching on it.
I really, really want to come and see your place, Meg.
Oh, come. Yeah, come visit.
Well, I feel like we could talk for you for hours. We could probably do like a 5-part series with Meg, I reckon.
So be careful, because I can do that, right?
I was going to say, we could do that. We'll just call it, have you met me? I'm Meg.
But your
Funny.
stories
Yeah,
are amazing, and I think all the little anecdotes just make you so engaging to listen to. And Will and Anthea from Maplewood actually said, just wait till you meet Meg and interview Meg, because I told Will I was going to talk to you. He's like, you're going to love her so much.
Well, Anthea said to me the other night, because we did permaculture at the pub for the first one for Cessnock, so we said that we'd call it that one, so they came along for the first one, and Brett was there and Rick was there, everyone was there, and one of the first things Anthea said to me is, have you spoken to Meg yet? And I said, no, we're catching up on the weekend. She's like, you're absolutely going to love her. And we do.
It's so funny, because I feel like I've hardly met them. I mean, I adore them. His work is gorgeous. His design is absolutely gorgeous. And this is what I mean when people go, I had this thing happen. I was at Avoca Beach Theatre, and they had the sustainable house that they built in Melbourne, and
greenhouse,
and Juiced, I can't think of his baker. Anyway, he's there talking and presenting the movie, and lots of people there who are really interested. And people, it was like, please introduce yourself, say your name if you want to ask a question. So, question here, question here, question here. And I think, I've got a question. I go, hi, I'm Meg McGowan. And the room goes, Meg's here. I'm like, oh, shit. That's weird. That's really weird. I'm just this 62-year-old woman doing a bit of gardening, man.
But it goes to show, though, Meg, like you're doing your thing. You're doing it without any intention apart from those that are pure to make a difference. There's no ego involved. You're doing your thing, and people resonate with that. Well, they love that.
I think it was when we were listening to the interview you gave on the ABC preparing for this. Was it your dad had a saying about that? Imagine what we could do.
Imagine what we could achieve if we didn't care who got the credit.
Yes. Yeah, and we both.
You lived that. You lived that, Meg. I think you can.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and not only that, but what's credit worth anyway?
Exactly.
I'll tell you something. This is personal. I recently collapsed my personal Facebook page. So my personal Facebook page, for a while, I had this attitude of anyone who wants to be my friend, sure, I'll add them, whatever. And it got it was in the several hundreds. And then following the birth of my grandson, my daughter and I, particularly because of my child protection background, were having serious conversations about how much of his life will end up on social media, because I have very strong views about the use of, and in particular, the use of children as kind of props to market your business or to demonstrate. So, it's very concerning. And so I'm just sitting with that and going, what is social media, and why am I putting up what I eat or what I think, or and I had this lovely couple on an introductory course recently, Matt and Louisa, and they turned up with a book. They said, we've bought your book. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in love with you. You know me so well. You've brought me the thing I cherish almost as much as gardens, a book. And it's a book called The Dreaming Way. And it's all about Aboriginal culture and the attitude that Aboriginal people have towards ego, and the fact that this desire to differentiate yourself and to go, look at me, look at me, look at me, is dysfunctional and unhealthy. And I read it and went, oh my God, that's social media. Social media is all about, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I'm not about look at me. People say to me all the time, you're never in your videos. I said, well, no, people aren't watching to look at me. They're watching to look at the garden. So I video the garden.
That's a good point.
But yeah, look, I get that people need to make income, and I'm not taking anything away from that. I'm fortunately retired, So I'm not interested in selling anybody anything or promoting anything, or, you know, I'm financially secure. And particularly because we get plenty of help in the garden in exchange for doing something that we love.
Yeah.
And that means I don't need to sell online courses or ask for money. And so I understand that people do need to become a brand, and that's a big part of what people are doing. But it's almost like we've all started doing it. It's like even people who don't need to be a brand are now cultivating a kind of online persona. And it did, because it's been really interesting for me. I now have 12 Facebook friends, and 4 of those are family members. So I've got, you know, the other 8 people are people that I see on a very regular basis, and we have dinners together, and we have, full disclosure, we have Disney princess nights.
Disney princess.
So we are, yeah, Disney princess nights, where you all get together and watch a Disney movie. It's fabulous. We have the best fun. So, you know, these are people who are legitimately my close friends.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the hardest things was saying to people who are not my super, super close friends, look, I would rather be your real life friend than your Facebook friend. I don't want to not be your friend. Even though the message I sent out said, I'm collapsing this for mental health reasons.
Yeah.
So hundreds and hundreds of people who've said they're my friends. So I did a general post saying, I sent everyone an invitation to Permacoach. I sent a general post saying, I'm shutting down this, I'm collapsing this profile. And then for people who are real friends, I sent them a message saying, let's be real friends and forget about Facebook. And I included in that the phrase, in the interests of my mental health.
Yeah.
Do you know how many people asked me if I was okay?
None.
5.
Wow.
5 people got in touch and said, hey, Meg, are you okay? And I am okay.
Yeah.
But it told me that I'd done the right thing.
Yeah. I've recently,
you took proactive action.
my family are actually really offended. I don't know if I've told you this story yet, but we have all these group chats, you know, family group chats and friend. I've just deleted all the apps and told everybody, if you want to talk to me, talk to me.
Yep.
Call me on the phone, send me a text. And they're using them, you know, to send photos to the kids, to stay in touch. And I just said, I'm sorry, I'm unsubscribing from this. I'm not doing it. If you want to talk to me, we can have a genuine relationship. You can call me, we can chat. But I'm getting rid of and they're not, you know, hundreds of people. It's our family group chat. But still, I was like, I just don't want to do this. I'm sick of my phone pinging. I'm sick of all of this nonsense. If I want to engage with you and if you want to engage with me and want to have a genuine relationship, that's what will happen. And I'm done. Group chats and no more.
Yep.
I just got rid of them all.
And you know, the other thing, of course, about Facebook is my growing concern in relation to the way the algorithm is deployed.
Yep.
That, you know, we know the algorithm is deployed to influence us, and we know it's deployed to target us and influence us specifically. So, and we know it's being used by people during elections and by large corporations and by all kinds of other people seeking to keep us frightened and alone, basically.
Yeah.
Because when we're frightened and alone, and this is the other point I wanted to make about the whole push for self-sufficiency. I think the push for self-sufficiency is capitalism at its worst.
Yeah.
It says stay home, buy everything you need, and guard it with your life.
Yeah.
You know, be afraid. Don't trust other people. Don't share the resources or the responsibility. Hoard what you have, and look after your own family, and bugger everybody else.
And of course, that ends up with absolutely no one winning and no one being able to be self-sufficient. And it's a collapse of any sort of society, isn't it?
We only just had the conversation before we jumped on with you about how we hate that self-sufficiency is this gold standard for a lot of people that come to permaculture through a gardening lens, because that's how we came to permaculture. We thought, oh, you know what, we're going to go to Brett's place and learn how to grow carrots better. You know, that's how we saw permaculture, as a gardening technique, not as a way of living and designing things and, you know, all the other things that permaculture can be. And so, that concept of self-sufficiency being a gold standard to aim towards is just BS. Like, I really don't agree with it. You know, in
we set up a
tomatoes maybe, or you know what I mean? Like, I think there's joy in that. That's fine, but to be an island, there's no such thing. It doesn't work.
Yeah. And are you planning on making your own solar panels there, are you planning on never driving on that community owned road? In the vehicle that you made from the sticks and pieces of twine that you hand wove on your own property?
Yeah, yabba dabba do.
You know, how's all that working out for you with your self-sufficiency?
Exactly.
And, you know, the thing that cracks me up when I see people spruiking self-sufficiency on YouTube and social media is how often they have plastic bags full of products that they've bought onto the property, and they're talking about how self-sufficient they are. And I'm going, what? You and Bunnings, right?
Yep.
That's how you're self-sufficient as long as you've got access to Bunnings. You want to see self-sufficiency, make friends with somebody living in a refugee camp in Uganda, because when you do that and you see what they're actually doing, so we've got a couple of friends who are in that situation. Now that's self-sufficiency, because if they put more energy into growing food than the energy that food will provide them, they will starve to death.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't afford to waste energy, and there is no Bunnings. You don't just go
down the road for a few things. Yeah.
No, there's no rock dust. There's no seaweed extract. There's no pelletized chicken manure in those systems. And if you're using those things, how on earth are you claiming to be self-sufficient?
Yep.
Because you've missed the most important part of the equation, which is if the energy that what you're really doing is taking your energy that's embodied as money and using it to extract energy from somewhere else so that you can put it back into your system.
Yeah.
And if that energy equation is, and then to do what? To grow some lettuces and some tomatoes. I mean, let's do an energy equation on what those lettuces and tomatoes actually cost.
Yep.
And compare that to just supporting your local organic grower, who in terms of economies of scale. So, people say, oh, do you grow all your own food? I say, oh, God, no, I wouldn't grow carrots if you paid me money. There are people who do a really good job of growing carrots, and they grow them organically and they grow them locally. And it's really important that I support them to do that, because without people like me supporting them, that business falls over.
Yeah.
And there's an economy of scale in growing carrots that means it makes a whole lot more sense to grow a lot of carrots together and to watch them really closely and to have a proper irrigation system on them. And occasionally a couple of carrots turn up in my garden because I once grew them and they went to seed, but they don't do well here.
Yeah.
So why would I grow carrots? We run a produce share, and the produce share teaches people to give generously with no expectation of return, receive gratefully with no obligation of debt, to share fairly and take only what they know they'll use. Some people think that's about the vegetables. It's actually about culture, and it's about community.
Mm-hmm.
It's shifted this community to one where people regularly give away things of considerable value via the Facebook page. So people will say, I ordered these windows for the extension, they don't fit. Would someone like them?
Yeah.
Wow.
People give stuff away, and they give it away safe in the knowledge that when they need something, they can probably ask someone in the community and either obtain it or loan it.
Yeah.
Imagine the difference that's made environmentally.
Huge.
The difference it's made to live in a community where when I'm...
Just, to know that you have someone who has your back.
But also imagine what it does to the mental health of the people who live here, because now instead of living in an environment of fear and lack and need, we live in an environment of abundance and generosity. So the fact that my neighbours who don't have any parents living anywhere near them can pick up the phone and say, something's just happened, can you take the kids?
Yeah.
And we go, of course, send them over.
Yeah.
And let's trash the lounge room together. That's the opposite of self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
That's the complete opposite. The fact that if somebody in the community is struggling, we all get together. we had a woman locally had twins recently, and we set up a meal train.
Yeah.
And she and her twins and her family were fed for, I think, the first 6 weeks of their from their arrival home.
It is absolutely.
But not only that, she met all these great people in the community who are saying, "What else can we do to help you with the twins? How else can we support you?"
Yeah, what
that's
do you
really
need? And not what we here take this because we think you need it. What do you need, and we will.
What do you need? Yeah. What can I do to support you right now? What is it that you need right now? That's permaculture. That's real social permaculture, not share my surplus. What's that mean? What's surplus? How do I sit and talk to Bumeriki, who's in Uganda, and say, I'm sending you $100, Bumeriki, because I've got surplus.
Yeah.
Like, I look around my home and go, if I'm serious about fair share, if I'm honest about fair share, the disproportionate, it's good to move into those places of discomfort. We become better people for being in them.
Yeah. And I think.
Sorry, you were trying to wrap up, weren't you?
That's all right. We've only been going. What are we? It's almost. We're coming up on 1:45.
Okay, well, you can probably split it into 2 podcasts. You can probably. Do you want to do another hour?
3-part series.
That's all right. You'll be able to break Brett though and go, beat you. Had them talking longer.
So anyway, there's lots we could probably keep doing.
So much.
Well, you know where I am. If you want to have another chat, I'm very happy to. It's lovely to meet you. Good luck with it all.
Yes, thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Meg. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
So that's the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. We hope that this episode gave you some inspiration, confidence, and has helped you in your Permi journey.
Head to the show notes for all the resources mentioned in today's episode. And if you like the podcast, please remember to subscribe, rate, and share. And if you didn't, then that's okay. We'll still love you anyway.